Hi there, this is Elena with Black Sheep 303 Creative, and my project today is my take on the Northern Lights technique with distress inks for a New Year's card. And this is the photo I used as my sort of inspiration. I wanted to get that banded, vertically wispy look for the lights, so that's what I'm going for here. I did watch a few different YouTube videos on this Northern Lights technique, but I didn't really see anybody doing that vertically bandy look, so I'm giving it a shot here. So I've masked off my ground with some Post-it notes, and now I am taking my mini distress blending tool and squeeze lemonade, and I'm going to use the side of my blending tool here, and I'm just basically like swiping on the squeezed lemonade in sort of a vertical slashy motion to kind of lay down the base for my bands of Northern Lights. And so I wind up with kind of three bands. There's sort of one along the land where the land meets the sky. Then there's one in the upper left corner, and then there's kind of the big one that runs across the whole middle area. So as I'm swiping, I'm only swiping into like as high as the band is going to go. So I'm not swiping all the way up. I'm only swiping, like, I don't know, an inch or so for each one. And this is a little hard to see because it's yellow on white, but as we get into the darker colors, you will get a better feel. So this is Evergreen Bough, and so I'm using the side again, and I'm kind of putting in the base of the bands of light with this, as well as adding in some of that vertical slashy motion. Now, I've sped this up significantly, so hopefully you'll still be able to follow it, but otherwise we would be here all day. And so with the salty ocean now, I am trying to fill in the sections between the bands of light, and getting a little bit of the blue into the vertical slashes, if you will, but mostly trying to fill in the area between the bands. And then I'm taking Dusty Concord now and doing a similar technique, but I'm being a little more vertical and slashy with the tool now, because there's a significant amount of purple in the bands in that photo. I'm not sure you can tell looking at it on this video, but it is there when you see it, when you print it out in person. And now I'm taking Chip Sapphire, and I'm using a little more of a traditional method around the edges to blend it on and darken down the sky. But then between the bands of light, I'm again going back to the sort of the edge of my distress tool and trying to fill in the areas and darken down the areas between the bands of light. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing here with black soot to kind of darken around the edges, and then darken in the areas in between the bands of light, and even a little bit between the sort of vertical swipiness of the light bands themselves, if that makes sense. And now I'm just going to kind of go back and forth, adding colors and darkening down just till I get the colors the way I want them. So that was Dusty Concord. And now here's a little bit more of Evergreen Bough that I'm kind of adding back in with my like slashy, swipey motion. And then I'm going to add in quite a bit more yellow, because the yellow seems to be getting lost with all the darkening down and the blue tones that I've used. And then I decided I need a little pink, so I grabbed my picked raspberry and I added in a little bit of pink into the swipey slashes of the lights to just give it a little more depth of color. And then I blend that out with Dusty Concord to kind of make it more of a purpley pink rather than a real pink look. And now I'm going to darken down the sky again with Chip Sapphire, and again I will do it with black soot as well. And even though it looks a little bit like a hot mess right now, it does turn out pretty well in the end, and once we get to the last couple steps, I think that is what makes a big difference. So here's the black soot to fill in the areas between the bands again. And I really wanted to get this so it looked good without adding trees in front of it. I didn't want to add trees. I wanted it to have like just a snow look to it, as if you were like kind of in the Arctic or something. So I didn't want to have any trees. So I was trying to get a fairly realistic look. Now here's sort of what I think might be the key to this. And that is the American Crafts chalk marker in white. It's a permanent chalk marker in white. And I'm just basically kind of slashing it in the direction of the light bands. And this marker, it goes on sort of translucent, and it's not a solid white. You can get it to be a solid white if you do enough coats, but it's a sort of a translucent-y white, and it takes a little while to show up. But once it does, I think that's what kind of finishes off that wispy effect on those light bands. And then here's my Uniball white gel pen that I'm using to just add some tiny, tiny stars here and there. Honestly, I'm not sure you see stars when you see Northern Lights, but it actually adds a lot of depth to the sky, so I'm good with it. And now I wanted to add 2 snowmen with their backs to us. So I've got the snowmen from the Lawn Fawn Ready Set Snow stamp set here, and I'm going to be stamping them down. The only problem is in the stamp set, they are designed to be facing forward, which makes sense. But I wanted them to look like they're facing backward, like facing away from us. So to do that, I'm inking it up with Memento Tuxedo Black ink because I'm going to be coloring these with alcohol markers. And now I'm using my baby wipe to try to wipe off any elements on the stamp that make them look like they're facing front. So obviously like their faces, the buttons, there's a little bit of scarf detailing that I don't want. And just to get them fairly plain without all that detail on the front. And these guys are super small, so it wouldn't really make sense to try to mask off those areas because the stamps are so small themselves. And then once I put it over the white, I can tell I've got a little bit of black still on some of those details. And then I pull off the second stamp because I'm worried I've got ink on that as well. And then I just stamp them down. And although the image isn't great, it's okay. And I take my Copic liner and I fill in any areas that don't stamp well. Oh, and I wanted to mention that I did do this on cold press watercolor paper. I wasn't sure when I started the project if I was going to be using water, so that's why I used watercolor paper, but to be honest with you, I'm not sure that was actually necessary because I didn't use water. So you could probably do this just using plain old white cardstock. So I used the exact same technique to stamp the second snowman, and then I have created masks here using my Post-it note. And I'm not sure I needed to mask off the sky, but I wasn't sure, so I started off with a mask. And now I'm sped this up crazily because this is just really regular distress blending technique. I'm going from the mask onto the snow and from the craft mat onto the snow to get an even coat of hickory smoke all over the snowy areas. And so I just went over it and over it and over it till I got kind of the color that I wanted. And now I'm adding a little bit of weathered wood to just give it a little bit of a blue cast. And then I'm adding in some shadows behind the snowmen. And so to color the snowmen, I'm using my Spectrum Noirs, and I am using my favorite combo for all things snow related, which is IG1, IG2, IG4, and IG6. So I started off with IG1, and now I'm adding shadows with IG2, and because they are lit from the front, I gave them that kind of haloed effect around the edges so that you can tell that they are being lit from the front, and I think that does make a big difference. And I added IG4 to darken down the shadows and blended that with IG2. And now I'm adding in some IG6 to darken down the areas right around like their scarves and the hat and their neck and the base of their bodies. And then I'm blending that out with some IG4. And you might have noticed I had a little bit of a mistake on the back of the one guy's snowman's head. That I'm attempting to cover up with my darker shadows, but it doesn't really work. You do kind of see that mistake in the end, but well, whatever. I'm not going to worry about it. I say it's handmade, so it's going to have some imperfection, and that's okay. So now I'm just blending out the shadows a little bit more, and now I'm going to go to the hat. And for this, I use TB1 and TB3, and so I base coated it with TB1, and then I add some shadows in with TB3, and then I blend it out with TB1, and that's when I decide that I don't really like the blending. It's like too light. So I go back in and I just reinforce the shadows with the TB3, and so I do the exact same thing for everything else, where I start out blending it, and then I decide, no, I want a more defined shadow, kind of like the halo effect around their bodies. So I just add the shadow afterwards. Like after blending it, I reinforce the shadow again with the dark color. just to give it kind of that straight, more defined edge to it rather than more of a blend. So with my scarf, it's CG2 and then DG3 for the shadows. And then I go back to the blue combo for the other guy's scarf, which is again TB1 and TB3. The earmuffs were PL2 and PL4 if you missed that. And the supply list will be linked below in the video description. I do have the specific colors of like the inks and the markers that I use listed in the supply list over on my blog. So if you want that information, that is available. And now I'm darkening down the shadows behind them. They just didn't seem dark enough. So I added some IG6 and I blended it with IG4. And then I just put a little bit of IG2 on his pom-pom on his hat. And that is it for the coloring on them. And then I wanted to add some sparkle to the Northern Lights. So I took my Spectrum Noir sparkle marker in clear and just sort of slashed through the lights in the direction that they were facing to give it just a little bit of sparkle. Now for my greeting, I printed that out on Word and on some white cardstock, and I just trimmed it down into a nice square. And I'm just going to adhere this panel to the front of a black A2 sized card base. And then I did bump up the greeting with a little bit of fun foam behind it to give it just a tiny bit of dimension. But other than that, I didn't add anything else to the card. I didn't think it was necessary to add anything else. I kind of wanted the Northern Lights to be the star of the show here. So that's why I left it purposely pretty plain. I just wanted the sky effect to be the star. And there you can see a little bit of the shimmer there. So hopefully this is a little bit of an inspiration for a way to try out the Northern Lights technique using a little bit of a different method, maybe. I'm sure there is someone out there on YouTube who has done this sort of vertically effect with distress inks before. I did find some painters who have done it. I couldn't find any distress inks using this specifically, kind of going for this look, but I'm sure they're out there. So I really appreciate you watching. Thanks so much. As I mentioned, there is a supply list linked in the video description below and over on my blog. If you liked the video, I'd love it if you give me a thumbs up, and I would love it even more if you subscribe to my channel. Here are a couple more videos involving distress inks and Spectrum Noir coloring. One's distress inks, one's Spectrum Noirs, that I thought you might be interested in. And I really appreciate you watching. Have a great day.